station with the balls to talk professional wrestling. Now, let's go ringside with former professional wrestler and instructor Les Thatcher.
Hey, Tri-State, it's time to ring the bell for another Wednesday night main event. Baseball is over, at least till next week when I think we get cut into by the fourth game of the World Series. But anyway, we've got a full 2 hours tonight. A great special guest, of course, our ring announcer Patrick Black's in the house. Dr. Love on the scene. And, of course, Joe the producer is on board tonight, too. Patrick, let's lead off with a couple news items, and we'll go from there.
All right. Both Raw and Nitro have garnered more mainstream publicity stemming from how the Monday Night Wars have affected the ratings of Monday Night Football. The 9/28 Monday night game drew an 11.1 rating for the Detroit Lions versus Tampa Bay Buccaneers game, which is the second lowest rating in the 29-year history of the show, where the two wrestling programs combined for a total of 866. On this date, more than the teen boys 12 to 17 watch this more than football. It also might be noted that they are selling NWA replica T-shirts at New York Jet games, the Jets World Order, and Jacksonville Jaguar games, the Jaguar World Order.
And, of course, you see the Cubs World Order during the playoffs as well. On the ECW scene, Mike Awesome is getting reconstructive surgery on both knees and will be out of action about 9 months. Chris Candido, Tammy Sitch, Rob Van Dam, and Just Incredible have reportedly signed 5-year deals with ECW. The November to Remember pay-per-view has been moved to the UNO Lakefront Arena in New Orleans. It is said that Paul Heyman has an interest in signing both Terry Funk and Vader for that show, the two guys most likely to do a moonsault.
There you go.
The Bret Hart movie is scheduled to air on A&E on either 12/18 or 12/20. It will air about 5 weeks earlier in Canada. There is going to be a Canadian preview screening of the movie on 11/10 in Toronto. There will also be an American grand opening screening in mid-December in Los Angeles.
As I get most of the injury reports this week, Hunter Hearst Helmsley is staying 6 days a week in Birmingham, Alabama after arthroscopic knee surgery, working on rehabilitation. The surgery procedure he underwent was somewhat experimental, and there is a chance he may need full-blown reconstructive surgery if this doesn't rehab well, in which case he will be out of action probably until next spring. WWF had hoped for him to return by Survivor Series.
Boy, knees are the order of the day, aren't they? But let's talk about some of the upcoming area events. Saturday, October the 31st, Hamilton, Ohio, the National Guard Armory, an HWA Halloween party, 6 big matches starting at 8 p.m. featuring WWF superstar Al Snow in the Head versus the expert Brian Taylor, managed by GQ Masters III. Plus, candy for the kids. Door prizes for best costume judged by Al and the Head.
Saturday, November 7th, Blanchester, Ohio, FOE Hall, 7:30 p.m. featuring lady wrestlers Debbie Combs and Candy Devine in a mixed tag match. Plus Chip Fairway, Shark Boy, Live Wire, Sean Casey, The Expert, and others.
Aberdeen, Ohio, Municipal Building, 7:30 p.m. on Saturday night, November the 14th, sponsored by the Lions Club, featuring Tarek the Great, Cody Hawk, The Extremist, Guy Quebec, and others,
yes. Tuesday, November the 17th, Danny Davis's Ohio Valley Wrestling begins wrestling back at the Louisville Gardens on an every Tuesday night basis, featuring stars from OVW, HWA, WWF, and more.
Wednesday, November 18th, the WWF returns to Cincinnati, Ohio at the Gardens. Bell time, 8 p.m.
And HWA brings wrestling to Lynchburg, Ohio at the middle school in December. Stay tuned.
Yes, some of the upcoming, sure, I'm starting to talk like you, Patrick. The upcoming guest next week, Wednesday, October the 21st, former WWF Tag Team Champ from the Heavenly Bodies and current WWF trainer, Dr. Tom Pritchard. Also, Wednesday, October the 28th, my birthday, by the way, guys, don't be afraid to bring gifts. Current WWF
and
Tag
how old
Team,
will you be?
Too old.
Thank you.
JJ will probably be able to tell you. Current WWF Tag Team Champions, Road Dogg Jesse James, and his father, the legendary Bullet Bob Armstrong. And on Wednesday, November the 4th, WCW referee Mark Curtis and Wrestling Perspective publisher David Skolnick. And, of course, don't forget, WWF's in town on the 18th of November, and in the studio we're going to have DX, Road Dogg, and X-Pac. All right. We have a very, very special guest tonight. I first met this man in the early 70s when he ventured away from home to pursue a wrestling career. Someone had told him to look me up, and I would show him around the Carolinas where we were based at that time. Beginning of a relationship that has spanned almost 27 years. Most of you fans listening would know this man as the original manager of the Four Horsemen and their mastermind. In fact, Arn Anderson states in his book that this is one of the 5 most intelligent people he has ever met. You would also currently know him as chairman of WCW's Executive Committee. I know him as my former tag team partner, traveling companion, and longtime personal friend, Mr. J.J. Dillon. J.J., how you doing?
That's great. Really, really great. This is a special treat for me to be able to spend some time with you reminiscing about the old days, I hope.
Yes, sir. You know, I was telling these guys, you and I could sit here and go on for a couple hours and still not have enough time to cover the last 26-plus years, would we?
No, we've been down a lot of roads during that period of time.
And, you know, I was thinking on the way down here to the station tonight, you were an English teacher, started refereeing for the old WWF, right?
Yes, back in my college days with Vince's father.
And from that point up into current, you have virtually done everything in this business there is to do. Manage, wrestle, set up the ring. You've worked as a matchmaker and currently in an executive capacity with WCW. And my friend, from the time you and I met back in the early 70s, this business has changed again and again. I mean, 27 years ago, if we'd have thought of half the things that are going on now, everyone would have thought we were eating peyote or something.
You're absolutely correct, Les. It's an ever-evolving thing, and just changes been dramatic in just the last year or two.
You know, I haven't quite finished Arn's book yet, although it is quite fascinating simply because of knowing all the people and being a lot of the places myself. But he says you're one of the 5 most intelligent people he's ever met. What did that cost you to get put that in the book?
I don't know. I don't know what he was thinking that day when he came to that rationale. But you know, we've been around each other, Arn and I, for not as long as you and I have been. But God, I would say 15 years anyway. And he's just somebody that I have a lot of respect for. I respect him professionally, and I respect him personally, and he's just a credit to the business.
I want to get into, of course, the Horseman thing, which has to be one of the major highlights in your career. But before that, I was thinking, when we met in the Carolinas and became tag team partners, tag team wrestling now, still around, but it seems to have faded, and I don't think there is the psychology and the teamwork that we had back in the 70s. And, of course, in the Carolinas at that time, that was the hotbed of tag team wrestling.
I think you're absolutely right. You know, as I reflect back on those early days, George Becker and Johnny Weaver, Rip Hawk Swede Hansen, Group Bernard, and the Missouri Mauler.
The Andersons.
The Andersons, oh God, yes, how can you not forget them? There were a lot of great teams, and it was a challenge and an honor to be able to compete with them at that time, because they were among the best that there were, and it like I say, it's a lost art.
And you know, I don't think either one of us ever thought at that point in time what we were surrounded by, but we're sitting here talking about it now, and I've been thinking about it since, you know, we've made arrangements for you to be on the show. And, I mean, what a learning ground. What an education. Well, as I mentioned on the opening here when I introduced you, it was actually, that was your first venture away from home. You had refereed and wrestled up in the Northeast, simply around home, and that was your first time out into a new territory, right?
Yeah, it was. I really followed the profession since I was a youngster, as far back as I can remember, maybe in my early teens. And I was born and raised in Trenton, New Jersey, and I remember the first match I went to was in the old Armory in Trenton, and Argentina Rocca was against Carl von Hess. I can just envision today sitting there in awe of everything that went on, and just to be there, and just, you know, it's like they say you can watch baseball on television, but you go there and smell the popcorn and the hot dogs and the cheering and the jeering, and wrestling is no different. Television, even with all the technology, still can't create the atmosphere of being there in person. And that first match I went to had me hooked, and I did everything. I sold programs so that the guy that had the vending would get me into the building, and so that I could be there.
You were a con artist even then.
Walk around freely. And so, like you said, I have done it all, from selling programs to popcorn to helping put up the ring to ring announce. Everything in between.
We're going to have to get back to this. Joe's giving us a signal here for a break, so we're going to have to take a break. We're here on All Sports 1360 Homer. Hey, we're back on Wednesday night main event. Les Thatcher, Patrick Black, Dr. Love, and our very special guest from WCW, my longtime friend JJ Dillon. JJ, let's get into the Horseman thing. I was talking to Dave Meltzer a couple weeks ago, had him on the show, and we were talking about Rick's return in Greenville, and he said, as far as he was concerned, it had to be the most exciting moment he'd ever seen in professional wrestling. You were right there in the ring, and I know the chill bumps must have been up on the back of your neck, too.
I'm interested that Dave made that statement. I had yet to follow any of his recent reports, but, well, like you say, having been there in person, experienced it myself, it was quite a night. I have to reflect back and say that many of the highlights of my career, most of the highlights, if not all of them, really centered around the glory years with the Horsemen. And there was a time that I thought maybe it was something that was passé, it was over, never to be recaptured. And if that was any indication in Greenville that night, I'm not so sure that maybe that fuel, the fire can't be fueled and rekindled. When Rick came out there finally, I mean, you could see as Arn brought everybody out that there was a tremendous amount of emotion in Arn's face. He'd given a lot of thought to the things that he wanted to say, and when the moment finally came in the crowd, it was like they were begging for Rick to come out there. And when he did, you could actually feel the ring vibrate. The people were making so much noise in there, and I can't ever remember in all my years in the profession having that experience that there was that kind of a spontaneous reaction that lasted as long as it did, and it really emotionally overwhelmed Rick, and I got caught up in him, and it just was one of those rare moments that doesn't come along very often.
That's something that you and I had the opportunity to do too in the early 70s, was watch the growth of Ric Flair. He came into the Carolinas barely a year in the business, and of course he never left, actually, except to travel around the globe 13 times, the world champion. But we were there when this guy was floundering around and just trying to learn his left foot from his right. Yeah,
and the history will look back on him, I'm sure, as one of the all-time greats. I have so much respect for the sacrifices that he made, the work ethic that he demonstrated. Anybody can go in front of a sold-out crowd and give those fans everything that they've got, knowing that what they expected, the fact that that's what they paid to see. But the line is drawn with those that go out there on those nights for whatever the reason, whether it's bad weather or just the publicity wasn't out like it should have been. And we've all experienced those nights that we go expecting a capacity crowd, and we're very disappointed. And if anybody ever would have been entitled to kind of just go out, go through the motions, it would have been Ric Flair. But I have to say, in all the years, I never ever saw him even on one single occasion. And I'm talking about nights, because we've all had times when we have the flu and those things that we have to deal with. And he would go out with a less than full crowd, and it's like he took pride in giving them everything that he had and then some, and basking in the response that he got back from the people as they showed their appreciation. And I think that's the key to his success and longevity.
And I think that was the key to the reception he got in Greenville, don't you?
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of people won't understand what I'm about to say, but you and I both do. There's an old saying in our business that a guy is so good he could have a match with a broomstick and make the broomstick look good. This is the guy we're talking about, if there ever was one, right?
Yes. He could take people of any experience level, people with limitations in terms of their physicality and whatever other qualities that they brought that got them to wherever they were in the business, and he was always able to get the maximum out of anybody that he ever went in the ring with.
Well, two guys that are right now very prominent in your company, WCW, Lex Luger and Sting. I feel that their reputations were made in the ring with Ric Flair.
That's probably a very, very valid statement to make. They had many, many matches, both individually and in tag situations with Rick, and I'm sure that they are better performers in the business now as a result of that experience.
And now with the new Horsemen, these two young guys Benoit and Malenko. I mean, there's nobody more intense than Chris Benoit, and as far as technicians in that ring, these two guys, I know Eddie Guerrero keeps talking about the future of our business, but I think here's two guys that are going to lead that charge.
I agree. I don't know whether it'll eventually be under the banner of the Horsemen. I think there's a certain wave of emotion right now that they're caught up in. Certainly, Ric Flair is the key to the success. I think if Ric Flair hadn't come back, it would have been difficult for the Horsemen to be anything close to what they ever were, and it would have been name only. And the other key is certainly Arn Anderson because of the history. And then from there, I think it'd be a game of chess and moving the kings and the queens and the rooks and the pawns and whatever around until they get a right combination. But again, the key is going to be Flair and Arn Anderson.
Let's back up a little bit. We talked about the Carolinas, the Mid-Atlantic territory, but you also were a prominent figure in the old Amarillo territory, and as well as in Florida, the old Eddie Graham office. And there were a great deal of tremendous wrestlers developed and came out of the Florida territory.
True. Like you said, I left college, I refereed and bounced around and did some things, and this was always my passion. And actually, I spent a year, I was living in eastern Ohio and based out of Pittsburgh, where they only had kind of a little mini situation that they had live matches on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. Circle probably 100 miles or so around Pittsburgh, and then they would run the old Civic Auditorium once a month. So I spent a year there, which took me to the next level in terms of experience that allowed me to be able to get my foot in the door in Charlotte, which I went to the Carolinas, the Mid-Atlantic area, and at that point it became a full-time thing with me. And thank God that I met someone like you that was willing to take the time to give me the benefit of the experience advantage that you had over me at that point to help nurture me along. And that's something else I think that's missing in the business today too, is
camaraderie.
The camaraderie. And we didn't fly on airplanes as much, but we made a lot of trips for a lot of miles for a lot less money. But it was on those trips that we talked wrestling, we talked strategy, we talked about what we would say in our interviews, we talked about situations in matches, and we would even go back and critique a match that we had what we could have done that would have been better. That's a lost art.
And of course, I think the thing's missing today too for a lot of the young guys. And I think then, anytime we went out to that ring, I don't care if it was the first match, the middle of the card, or the last match, we went out there to steal the show.
It was a challenge, and you and I would understand. But it's like the worst thing that we had, we didn't want to follow a match that bombed to have to go on after that, because that was a piece of cake, knowing the ability that we had and knowing what we were willing to do to succeed. The real challenge came from following what we used to refer to as a barn burner, and that was a challenge to go out there and not only equal whatever they achieved, but to exceed it.
You're exactly right. You mentioned the traveling, and I was thinking of a story, and I'm going to tell this real quick. This is to tell you what kind of a con artist J.J. Dillon was, and he talked me into this. We were going to Richmond, Virginia to wrestle. We were living in Charlotte, North Carolina, and he called me and he said, I got an idea. Instead of us making that drive, it was like 300 miles, I think, from Charlotte, and then we were going to stay over and going on over, I think, to Lynchburg on the next night, or Roanoke someplace. We could catch Sandy Scott up there and make the rest of this loop with him. Why don't we take the bus? I said, Jim, I haven't been on a bus since I broke in this business in 1960. And we'll just lay back and be leisurely. So I let him talk me into it. And this damn bus stopped in every burg and hamlet in North Carolina in Virginia between Charlotte and Richmond, and I don't know how many hours we were on that bus. By the time we got to Richmond, I couldn't wait to get off that son of a gun. But I'd never let him talk to me. I haven't been on a bus since, Jim.
I had forgotten that story, but yeah. Well, we were young, and we did a lot of crazy things. But those are the things that we reflect back on and that we remember with fond memories.
Exactly. I was telling these guys, I said, one of the things I thought it made us a good tag team, I said I had that volatile Irish temper, and I was a reactionary, and you're so analytical, and you sit back and decipher it for me and spread it